So this video is a part 2. Back in May, I released a video where I talked about the 10 2024 horror movies that I'd watched up to that point, ranked from my least favorite to my favorite. And since then, I've watched another 10. So let's do it again. Here's the last 10 2024 horror films I watched, ranked from least favorite to favorite. Again, I gotta reiterate this. This list is not gonna include any of the movies I talked about last time. To hear about movies like The First Omen, Late Night with the Devil, Abigail, tons of stuff like that, check out that video, link in the description below. This is just the last 10 that I have watched. By the way, welcome to the Cobwebs channel, everyone. My name is Daniel. Thank you so much for dropping by. Let's talk about some brand new spooky movies. At number 10, Imaginary. So this film is about a family, a stepmom, the dad, and 2 kids who move into the childhood home of the stepmom. And the youngest daughter starts to talk about this imaginary friend that she now has, this teddy bear. And at first no one's taking it seriously, but the stepmom especially starts to figure out maybe there's something to this. Maybe this teddy bear is not so imaginary. So this is one of the 2 movies that Blumhouse released this year that just got crapped on by everybody. It was this and Night Swim. I talked about Night Swim in the last video like this, and I gotta say, between the 2, I think Night Swim is the better movie. Now, it's not that I had a terrible time with Imaginary and that I hate it. I actually think it's fairly serviceable gateway horror. Actually, the way I've described it in the past is it's almost like if Hallmark made a horror movie, because it's super squeaky clean, super safe. But it's not even just that, just the way this movie is directed, the way it's acted, written. I mean, it feels like a cheap TV movie. This in no way feels like a movie that went to theaters in wide release. But it actually did, which is pretty wild. Now, it does have some imagination to it. Now, they go into the world of the imaginary friends in this movie. It's definitely nowhere near as cool as it should be, but they're trying. You feel like they're trying to make something a little bit different than the absolutely generic haunted house movie that this could be. And there is a teddy bear monster in it that's not bad. But even so, if I had to rewatch any of these movies, this is the one I would rewatch the least. At number 9, Maxine. So this is the 3rd film in Ty West's X trilogy, and it follows the main character of Maxine, played by Mia Goth, as she is working as an adult film actress in LA in the 1980s and trying to break into actual movies. She's trying to get into this horror film, but meanwhile, there is a serial killer going around slaughtering people, possibly even some people she knows. And I guess we kind of have to figure out what's going on with the killing, sort of. So I absolutely loved the first 2 movies in Ty West's X trilogy, which were X and Pearl. I thought they were both absolutely fantastic. And this one just fell short for me. I thought it was by far my least favorite of the trilogy. Those first 2 go together perfectly, and this one feels like this almost side tangent. I do think, even though a lot of people like this movie, and I totally respect that, I do think this is undeniably Mia Goth's weakest performance in all of these movies, and I think that's because this is the only one where at no point in the runtime does she play Pearl. And I just think Pearl is the way more interesting character from this trilogy, and without Pearl, I'm just not so interested in Maxine. She's a very unlikable character. The crux of the character stuff in this movie is her dealing with her past and also trying to become a star, trying to get famous. And I just don't care about her getting famous because she's not a good person at all. She's not an artist. She doesn't really have something to say. She just wants to be famous for the sake of it, and I just don't care. It wasn't very satisfying as a horror movie. The kills are mostly off screen. The kills we get are pretty nondescript. I wasn't interested in them at all. And I thought the 3rd act really jumped the shark. Was not a fan. At number 8, Cuckoo. So this film is about a teenage girl whose mother has passed away, and now she has to move in with her estranged father and his new family, who he clearly cares a lot more about than he cares about her. And they move to Germany, to this absolutely beautiful nature resort where the father's going to be doing some architecture work. And she starts figuring out there's something creepy going on with this resort, and especially with Dan Stevens, who runs the resort. So I actually got the chance to see this movie in a theater, which is cool because it's this little low budget-ish, it doesn't look cheap at all, indie horror movie, and I thought it was okay. Like, I don't have a dramatic opinion about this movie either way. I think a few things held this movie back for me. For one thing, the lead character I had trouble getting into. She's very much like an angsty teenager, Gen Z type. She was kind of hard for me to get invested in, even though she's undoubtedly going through some difficult things in this movie, like the death of her mother. You gotta feel for her there. but she's just being like super grouchy about everything. The location of this movie is just unbelievably beautiful, and she's just being a grouch about it the whole time. So she's kind of hard to get that invested in. And then when it comes to the mystery of this movie, there's something going on with Dan Stevens, and with some woman that she sees. What's going on with this very mysterious woman? And when all the mysteries get revealed, I just didn't think it was very interesting, and it felt way overwritten, and they hadn't really filled in all the kinks. So I just think when a movie reveals its mysteries, and it's as much of a mystery as this movie is, it should make you go, oh, like a light bulb should go off above your head, and you're like, that's what's going on, that's crazy. This movie, my reaction was more, what? Oh, all right. Okay, I guess we're doing that. I know, hard-hitting, well-written criticism is what you get here on the Cobwebs channel. That's just the best way that I can describe it. So I just wasn't that satisfying with the mystery, but I did really like Dan Stevens' performance, and there are some creepy moments, particularly with this mysterious woman, and I was, like, invested in the mystery as we go. It's just the reveal and the eventual third act climax that I found a little lacking. At number 7, taking a huge jump up, it's Strange Darling. So this movie has a very simple premise, and there's just not much I can tell you. But what I can tell you is it is about two people who meet, have a one-night stand in a hotel, and there is a serial killer involved, and things go wrong. And this is a really hard movie to talk about. I kind of wanted to put out just a video on this movie because I enjoyed it so much, but there's just so little you can say if you haven't seen it, and I do not want to spoil this movie. But what's really interesting about this film is it's a movie told in 6 chapters. It tells you that at the very start. But on the screen, it labels each chapter as they start, and it tells them out of order. So you start with chapter 3, and then you go chapter 5, and then you bounce around more until you eventually get to the ending. And it really turns this movie into a puzzle. What could have been a very straightforward story, something you feel like you've seen a lot, becomes this really interesting experience as you watch it. I actually got the chance to see this movie in a theater too. It wasn't playing anywhere near me. It's very limited release. I just happened to be traveling in a larger city this last weekend and got the chance to pop over to a theater and go check it out. And it was just such a cool experience putting this movie together. It feels very original, despite the fact that, once again, it is a very simple story, just told in a very unique way. A couple other things I want to praise about this movie. Now, the 2 lead actors, almost the only actors in the movie, although not quite, are fantastic. Willa Fitzgerald and Kyle Gallner. Kyle Gallner's kind of becoming a horror icon with time. He's just done great work in so many independent horror movies at this point. And Willa Fitzgerald I was not familiar with, but gave a great performance. Both of them very unexpected performances, very interesting. And then I thought the message of this film, if you want to say there's a message, which I would say there is very interesting and very different. I kind of feel like that's the main thing that I want from messages in movies nowadays, because I'm definitely not one of those people that says like, oh, just tell me a story, don't preach to me, blah, 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 because I believe art matters and art should say things about the world. But we've all heard so many of the same messages told over and over and over again if we've watched a lot of movies. And this movie, it ends up having a message that is kind of transgressive, something I've not heard in a movie recently, and it was unique. It was interesting. And then the other fun fact about this movie is Giovanni Ribisi shot it. He was the cinematographer. That's crazy, but he did a great job. This movie takes place in the Oregon mountains, and the location is absolutely beautiful. Very autumnal, too. Great vibe to this film.
I finally got my band!
At number 6, Frogman. So this movie opens up with a young boy on a family vacation, and he spots in the woods the Frogman. The Frogman is this kind of famous cryptid, much like the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot, and he spots it. And he's now kind of dedicated his life, because we cut forward to him as an adult, to trying to prove that he did see this and the Frogman is real. He decides to make a documentary about finding the Frogman, and then we get this found footage film about him, his ex-girlfriend, and his best friend going out into this town where he saw it and trying to prove this thing exists. Now, maybe I shouldn't be putting this over Strange Darling. I think Strange Darling is probably a better movie. But this is just like the little movie that could for me this year. This is just this little found footage film that I found so satisfying in a way that I almost never find found footage films to be. I've heard the critique about this movie that the setup is kind of boring, as we just have to watch these three characters kind of hang out in this town, go around, talk to some townsfolk before we eventually get to the horror of it all. And I just couldn't disagree more. And that's probably why I enjoyed this movie more than a lot of people, is I really liked these characters. I found them very relatable. The actors were so good. Have you guys noticed that if you go like back to the 80s and such, low budget horror usually has pretty bad actors. But now low budget horror has these great performers, like just everywhere. It's an interesting phenomenon. There's just so many great actors working in independent horror these days. And I don't know if I want to say these are great actors, but they're very capable and very natural. And I really liked watching them explore this town. Exploring a small town that's all built around the legend of a cryptid and has like gift shops dedicated to this legendary monster. I want to do that. That's my idea of a great day. Like, I don't want to go out to the bar scene and pub crawl. I just want to explore a small town that's just got some spooky vibes to it. And this movie gave me that. But when we get to the third act, and the Frogman stuff out in the woods is really building up, I couldn't believe how satisfying it was. Like, I wasn't expecting it. Like, I went into this movie like, we're probably not going to see much Frogman, and that's okay. It's a low-budget movie. I get it. I get the limitations. No, they go for it. They really do. Like, they go all in on making this a Frogman movie in all the ways they can. I loved it. It was so great. It was such a fun experience, and I highly recommend it. By the way, this movie and most of the movies that I'm talking about on this list are on streaming right now. That seems to be the model for horror right now, is if they go to theaters at all, they go to theaters for a few weeks maybe, and then they go to streaming real fast. And I understand that some people don't like that. You know, it doesn't give movies time to build an audience in the theatrical market. But as somebody who has a toddler at home and doesn't have the easiest time getting out to the theater, it's great for me. And you can watch most of these at home right now. It's pretty nice. But a movie that is not on streaming because it's still in theaters is my number 5, Alien Romulus. So this movie is about a group of young people, including a young girl and her android brother, who she just considers to be her brother, are trying to escape this totalitarian mining planet that's run by this evil company. They steal a ship, try to escape, and run into a bunch of facehuggers and xenomorph alien monsters. So I got a lot of requests to do a video about this movie, and even though I saw it opening weekend, the reason I didn't is because this is not my franchise, and I kind of felt like I'd be a poser looking in, because I love the original movie. It's a classic. It's great. Directed by Ridley Scott, written by Dan O'Bannon. I like the sequel, Aliens. I don't love it as much as a lot of other people. A lot of people talk about it as one of the greatest films ever made. I just never see that whenever I watch it, but I think it's good. I think it's fun. Never saw Alien 3. Actually started it with my dad back when he showed me the first two movies as a kid. We hated it. We bailed on it. Never went back. Haven't seen Resurrection. And I did see when Ridley Scott took over the franchise with Prometheus and Covenant. Did not like either one. So I just didn't like this franchise being Ridley Scott's brainchild. But Fede Alvarez, I love. I love him as a director. I love his Evil Dead remake. That movie has a special place in my heart because I saw it in theaters in 2013. And that was the goriest movie I'd ever seen in my life at that point. And freaked me out. I loved it. Then he made Don't Breathe, which I thought was also a fantastic movie. And I heard he was going to take the franchise back to its horror roots, but I had no idea how true that would be. Man, Alien Romulus is a horror film. Like, this is a jump scare, thrill ride, horrifying, gross experience of a horror movie. Like, this feels like going through a haunted house attraction in October, and you see so much scary stuff. Things are jumping out at you, and it's a full-on experience. I am not one of those people that complains about jump scares. Yeah, a badly done jump scare, that kind of sucks, much like a badly version of a lot of things suck. But when a jump scare is done well, there's almost nothing better, man, in the horror franchise. Getting a good jolt from something really scary in a movie, it's great. This movie has fantastic jump scares. It is gross, it is scary, but it's not like a movie, don't get me wrong, it's not like a movie I was personally like scared by. I gotta bring the covers up. I saw it in theaters, so I didn't have a blanket. But I could just see Fede Alvarez just crafting all of these scares so well, and I was just so impressed. Really like the gang of characters. I know some people don't like that it's about a bunch of teenagers, but that's kind of what Fede Alvarez does. He has like a ragtag group of young misfits. that covers most of his movies. The lead actor, Kaylee Spaney, is actually from my hometown, and one of my best buds actually worked with her on a short film. So it's cool that she's getting success. I thought she was great. But the person who steals the show is David Johnson, who plays the android. And look, he's some young, unknown actor. I never heard of him or seen him before. And he's following actors like Ian Holm, Lance Henriksen, Michael Fassbender as androids in this franchise. And he nails it. He is so good. Steals the show. Just such an interesting performance. I loved him. The xenomorph stuff is great. The face hugger stuff is really scary. It is a fun horror film. I highly recommend it. This brought me into the Alien franchise big time, and I'm grateful for that. At number 4, In a Violent Nature. So this is a slasher film that follows the killer. His name is Johnny, and he's very much a Jason Voorhees type character, and we follow him as he is resurrected from the dead because of some young people who steal an artifact that belonged to his mother, and he then has to track it down, find it, and kill these camping teenagers one by one. So yeah, that's the main hook of the movie. Is this a Friday the 13th style film that follows the killer for pretty much the whole time instead of following the partying teenagers? It's an interesting idea, and it's proven to be extremely polarizing. Some people have loved it, and some people thought it was super boring. I loved it. I was never bored when I watched this movie. The criticism I keep hearing is this movie is just a bunch of walking in the woods. And yeah, you do watch a lot of walking in the woods, but it's almost never aimless walking. I've said that several times. I believe it wholeheartedly. He's always walking towards something, or there's something going on in his peripheral. The movie does this excellent job of storytelling, often with minimal dialogue, and with just watching a guy walk, you always understand the story, what we're doing, where we're going, why. I thought that was very impressive. But even with me saying there's minimal dialogue, there's still a good amount of dialogue. And I'm a person, I like dialogue. I'm not always the biggest fan of silent films because I like dialogue, although silent films often have dialogue, but you know what I mean. And this movie does have a good bit in terms of people off to his sides, people he's sneaking up on. I thought it was great. I thought it was interesting, just this very different take on the genre that I love so much. I thought it was a relaxing experience. It like lulls you into this, I don't know, it was such a vibe, and I just loved the atmosphere of these woods. I mean, everything looked so beautiful, and the kills were spectacular. So even if you're a person that just wants to see kills, that's all you care about from a slasher, this movie's gonna deliver that, for sure. At number 3, Oddity. So this movie starts off with a woman who is in a house way out in the country that her husband and her are renovating, but she's there alone, and somebody knocks on the door, claims to be a mental patient of her husband's, who's a doctor, and says somebody snuck into your house right before you went in. He's in there and he's going to kill you. And now she is faced with, what do I do? Do I just kind of trust that this guy is crazy and he's just trying to say whatever he can to get me to open the door so he can kill me? Or is he telling the truth and there's something in there? And then the movie cuts forward. You don't know what happened, but she's dead now. And the movie picks up with her twin sister, who is a blind psychic medium who owns a store full of antique oddities that are cursed. And she is trying to figure out what really happened, who killed her sister. So I actually watched this movie last night. It just hit streaming. It hit theaters and didn't play anywhere near me. So I'm so glad I finally got the chance to see it. It's going to be on Shudder at the end of September. And I thought it was fantastic. I mean, for one thing, it is so beautifully well made. Seems to be an Irish movie. It seems like it has Irish actors and takes place in Ireland as far as I could tell. It's not a period piece, but it looks like a period piece. So it's got this very beautiful, just old-fashioned kind of a look that feels very timeless. The actors are excellent. I really loved Carolyn Bracken, who plays both the twins, the twin who dies at the beginning, and the one who is, again, a blind psychic medium who runs an antique store full of cursed oddities. Awesome. Like, what a great character. What a fun character to follow. But the imagery that you're probably going to see from this movie in any kind of promotional material is of this screaming wooden man. See, this movie is kind of witchy, and she seems to be, brings in this wooden man to her deceased sister's husband, who now has a new girlfriend, brings him to them and uses him for some witchcraft to try to figure out what truly happened to her sister. And this thing is so scary. That leads me into my biggest positive I gotta say about this movie. This is the scariest movie of the year. It's not my favorite horror movie of the year, but it's the scariest. In fact, this is the only horror film of the year that truly scared me. I talked about Alien Romulus's jump scares. They're great. Oddity has the jump scare of the year. One that really startled me, made me jump back, but like absolutely chilled me. Like it is incredibly spooky, unsettling. And this movie has multiple moments like that. It's also a ghost story, and you get to see the ghosts, and they're very cool looking. I say that a lot. Like, I know some people say what's truly scary when it comes to ghost horror is what you don't see. And I just find that to be a cop-out so often. Like, unless it's done really well, I don't want to see a door creak, okay? I want to see something cool, something spooky. I'm a horror fan, much for visual reasons. And this movie has really cool looking ghosts, so I highly, highly praise that. At number 2, the Vourdalak. So this is a French period piece about a marquis who is lost in the woods, who comes upon a cottage of a family living there, goes there for some help, and then they discover the father, the patriarch of this family, has been missing, but he comes back as a vourdalak. So this movie is based on a vampire novella from Russia called The Family of the Vourdalak. And it's also the source material of the Boris Karloff starring vampire segment in Mario Bava's horror anthology Black Sabbath is also based on. It's a story that predates Dracula, and this is very much a period piece vampire folk horror movie. And it's my number 2 because it's just so my thing. I love horror period pieces. I love folk horror with people out in the woods fearing what may be beyond. I love vampire movies. And this movie has got all those vibes. It's excellently made. And by the way, I reviewed this movie months ago because the studio was kind enough to send me a screener for it. I can now tell you it's available on streaming. So you can watch it right now. You just got to pay to rent it or maybe buy it so you can check it out. I think it's so good. And one thing that is so interesting about it, but it's also something I kind of want to warn you about, it's that the vampire is played by a puppet, not an actor. He is a puppet. He's like a marionette. Think like Creepshow or Return of the Living Dead, that kind of uncanny valley practical effect that you might see in one of those movies. And I thought it was so cool. It was so different and unique. Do I find this movie scary? No, but it is this gorgeous fairy tale that draws me in, that speaks to so much of my weirdo taste as a horror fan. And I thought it was awesome. But at number 1, Longlegs. So this movie stars Micah Monroe as a young FBI agent who is trying to crack the case of Longlegs, who is this serial killer who's been killing so many people. And she's trying to figure out, who is he? Why is he doing this? How can she stop him? So this movie is directed by Osgood Perkins, who I'm a big fan of. He directed movies previously like The Black Coat's Daughter, Gretel and Hansel. He's done a lot of really cool stuff. And this movie feels so in line with The Black Coat's Daughter, which is my favorite of his movies, which is great. This movie just draws you in by making you think it's a typical serial killer investigative thriller. And it turns out to be so much more than that. This is like the horror hit of the year that just blew up the box office like nobody thought it was going to. But I thought Micah Monroe was fantastic in this movie. A very different kind of performance from her, although she's always sad, and she's sad in this movie. But she's playing a very unique kind of character. Thought she was excellent. You got Nicolas Cage as the serial killer. Very creepy in this movie. Buried under a lot of makeup and giving a very... You can tell it's Nicolas Cage, don't get me wrong, but he's still giving a very unique performance, and I thought he was fantastic. And I just loved all the twists and turns this movie made. It's so gorgeously made. It's one of the most atmospheric, dread-inducing horror films I've seen in a long time. This movie's less scary than Oddity, but it is just this atmospheric dread that pumps through it that makes me love it so much. And I loved all the unexpected turns that it took that just made it a movie that I loved so much more than if it was just some basic serial killer movie. So there you have it, folks. But what are some recent horror movies that you've watched? Let me know down in the comments below. What do you think about these movies? If you enjoyed this, definitely check out the first video I made like this, the last 10 horror films that I saw, ranked from worst to best, or this playlist right down here for all of my new release reviews from this year. If you enjoyed this, I would definitely appreciate a like and subscribe. Thank you so much. Don't forget to enjoy yourself today, and I will see you next time.